Additional aids and services are available to individuals with disabilities. To make such a request, please contact us by email, by clicking the Help tab in the PD portal, or at pdportal@tamu.edu, by phone, including Relay Texas at 1-800-441-7323, or in writing to Train PD, PD Portal Support, 4477 TAMU, College Station, Texas 77843. Both a transcript and accessible document of the content presented in this webinar can be found as resources in the course description. Click on the blue links under Course Resources in the description. When a link is clicked, a new browser window will open.
So welcome everyone today to Bridging the Digital Divide in Adult ESL. Our speaker today is Dr. Glenda Rose. I'm sure most of you already know Dr. Rose, but she is one of our presenters in the state of Texas who presents a lot on digital literacy and on great teaching strategies related to adult learning and ESL. And we're very happy to have her talk today about how you can integrate digital skills building activities into everything you do in the adult ESL classroom. Dr. Rose is also the one who wrote the new DART curriculum, which is Digital Advancement and Resilience in Texas, and she'll talk a little bit about that today. She is the Director of Adult Education at Community Action, Inc., and she's based in Bastrop.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, well, welcome everybody. Like Michelle said, I am the Director for Adult Education at Community Action. And we are going to be talking a lot in my organization about bridging the digital divide in adult ESL, especially since we have those new digital literacy content standards coming out. They should be out next week. And our new contracts say that we have to include some digital literacy in our classes. So we are thinking about this at my program. I'm sure your program's thinking about it also. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that. Michelle did a great job introducing me. This is one of my teacher's classes. It's not one of mine. And in this case, it is actually a computer lab. But I'm curious, in the chat, do you have access to computers or a computer lab for your classes? Because that makes a difference on what you can and can't do in your class. I will say my organization, because we serve the 9 rural counties around Austin, tablets are good too. Some of our sites do not have easy access. So I will mention some things that you can do if you don't have access to a computer lab as well, and how you might have to adapt in that case. But even if you have a computer lab, there's some techniques that we want to talk about that will make your life so much easier. I have been in adult education for pay since 1987. I've primarily worked with English language learners. I've worked across the board, across the spectrum, from volunteer to director to state level professional development. But early on, I included digital literacy. I remember the first laptop I took to a class was probably 1992, when that term digital divide was coming out. And back then it was mainly about racial disparity between who had computers and access to the internet and who didn't. Now it's socioeconomic, it's rural versus urban. They're doing a lot of work at the federal level, if you've been in any of the broadband meetings, to get that leveled out some. But I've always included it. I think it's very important. You can see that our society has moved more and more and more digital. And the discussion I have with my teachers is, if I'm not teaching my adult English language learners digital skills, and they don't already have them, because some of them do, then I am putting them at a disadvantage in our society, and I don't want to do that. I am currently on the DART project, which is just about finished. I'm still sharing that information, the Digital Access and Resilience Project. Got it going to Indiana, Connecticut, and Florida here shortly. And also DRAW, which is Digital Resilience in the American Workforce. That's a national project that I'm helping with, that is through Jobs for the Future, JFF, and World Ed, working with state level, trying to get that out. So got a little bit of a background in this. I just love it. And I hope that you will be very excited about some of the things that I share with you today. I also know that some of you have some really good ideas, so I hope you'll share those as well. This was the session description. And again, it's really, for me, digital literacy is about being fair and making sure that everybody has the same access. If you think about something as simple as renewing your driver's license, if you don't know how to do that online, then you're going to have to take a day off work. You're going to have to go down to the DPS. You still probably will have to make an appointment. And that means you're either going to have to call if you can't do it online. Just about everything, job applications, your health portal. There's all kinds of things that if you don't have the requisite digital skills, you're not able to take full part in our society, and your options become diminished. And we don't want that. That's why we're in adult education and not making a ton of money, because we want to see people do well. Oh, and Michelle said the draw course, which has 4 modules and a lot of activities, may be available in the PD portal in 2024. That would be great. So what I want to do today is I really want to look at definitions, a definition of digital literacy, make sure we're all on the same page about what that means. And then we'll talk about some of the challenges for integrating digital literacy in our ESL, ESOL classrooms. We will look at some of the solutions for those challenges. And then we want to go on to define digital resilience, which is a slightly different concept and includes digital literacy through the lens of the Seattle Digital Equity Initiative skills list. We'll look at that. And then we'll think about some ways that we can include digital literacy activities in your classrooms. Even if you're already including digital literacy, I get excited when I do these presentations because somebody's going to share something I hadn't thought of. So I hope that you'll do that for me, and I will try to do that for you. This is one of those times when ESL teachers get together and we get to share ideas. So please don't be shy. So the first thing we're going to do is a chat check. So this is in the chat. We have 3 terms, and we're going to do them one at a time. I would like you to put your definition of digital divide into the chat box. Short definition. So Jose says having access versus not having access. Carly lacking computer skills. Nancy a split in digital ability. Interesting, Nancy. People who can use technology and people who don't. The Pew Institute does a lot of research on this if you guys are interested in reading more about it. So a lot of it has to do about access or ability, Jordan. Okay, that's a really good way of thinking about it. So who can use those resources, those digital resources? And that would have to do with both ability and access. It also has to do with access to the kinds of training that you might need to have to safely navigate the digital world. All right, let's do with digital skills. What are digital skills? Give me a short definition. You can include some examples if you would like. How-to skills. That's a really good way of putting it. They know how to do things in the digital world. Create content and share. Very good. Ability to use technology, access it, and make it relatable to their lives. Well, that's adult education. It all has to be relatable to their lives or they don't even want to play the game. Richard, able to access and navigate the internet. Okay, computer skills, my MS Office, ability to access the internet, ability to use computers, ability to use tech, ability to function and communicate in workforce. Got to keep that workforce in front of us. Tech savviness, that's a good way of putting it. Ability to find and evaluate. Ability to use and understand, ability to successfully use tech. Okay, so those are really good for the definition for digital skills. Now, what about digital resilience? How would that be different from digital skills? How would you define digital resilience? And it's okay if you've never heard that term or haven't used it, you can just say, I don't know, it's fine. It's a more recent buzzword that's come up. Jordan, I like that. The ability to update your skills as technology advances, being able to adjust. Exactly, Nancy, very nice. Willingness, it's a big part of it. Willingness to learn new tech skills and to adapt. Digital flexibility. I like that too. There's some things that I am really flexible and resilient in. Somebody brings me an Apple phone and I just roll my eyes and send them to somebody else. I don't know anything about Apple phones. Try somebody else. Not too sure, but I'm sure I'll learn. But I had to learn the basics, right? Because I'm a teacher and students would have those phones and I'd have to be able to show them what I wanted them to do on those phones. All right. Very nice. Ability to troubleshoot. That's really good too. Staying connected and informed. Okay, so this is just a chat check, and I'm sure you do something like this in your ESL classes. What does this look like in a face-to-face class, and how could you tie it to foundational digital skills? How would you do this activity, this chat check, in your face-to-face classroom and intentionally include foundational digital skills? And there's no right answer. I can think of at least 5 right off the bat. I'm just seeing what you guys come up with. Okay, so Jordan, you ask the questions to the students, and then what do you do with their answers? Put on the board or project. So Jordan, that's what I'm thinking about here. You don't have computers, but you can do the foundational skills. So let me give you an example. You could have students put their definitions for whatever term that you're working on sticky notes, and then have them categorize them. You could help them. Another idea would be to analyze, if you were doing a Google search on that, what would be the keywords that you would search for? Because keyword search is not as intuitive as people might think. Even Chat GPT, if you don't ask the right question, you don't get the right answer. So having students analyze their responses as a group is part of digital skills. It's part of computational thinking. So there's things that we can do, even if we don't have computers in our classroom, that we can do to get them ready or to help accelerate their digital literacy. Okay, so the next thing that I'm going to show you is something I use in my classroom a lot, and I will explain why, and it's called Poll Everywhere. The reason I like Poll Everywhere is because I do this at the beginning of the school year, and I don't have to do this again, except for new students, right? So for the rest of the school year, if I'm doing a poll, they use that same number, 22333, to text their answers to. If you don't have a cell phone and you're not able to do it by text, you can open a web browser. In the blue there, you see open a web browser, go to pollev.com/Dr. Glenda Rose 536, and that will let you do the same activity on the website. So when I'm thinking about digital skills and literacy and access in my ESL classroom, my students are all over the place, right? They're from very low digital or no digital skills. I've never touched a computer before, to I'm a computer engineer from Monterey Polytech. Literally, I've had that kind of extreme diversity of digital skills. So I want to make sure that whatever activity I do, especially if it's not in a computer lab, that it's going to be accessible to everybody. So if you did it by phone, you haven't seen the questions yet. If you were doing it with the website, you got the question. So let me pull the question up over here. Here it is. So the instructions, you're going to text that 22333 number ABCDE on how confident are you at helping English language learners develop their digital skills and digital resilience, with A being completely confident and E being very insecure. And one of the things I love doing this with my ESL students is they love to see this chart move as they're answering. There's other activities, there's other programs you can do with this, like Mentimeter, Poll Daddy. You could even use a Google form, but I like this one because it's the same all year and I don't have any issues with it. I've been using it for years and they just keep expanding the kinds of polls you can do. So most of y'all are pretty confident. A couple of you are meh, and I get that. I've got 12 of you that have answered so far. And there's 17 in the room. So either 5 of you are eating breakfast or lost. So let me know if you need help with this poll. I have a total. This is the nice part for the teacher. I can see how many people have responded, but it is anonymous for my students, so they don't feel pointed out if they don't get something right. I use this a lot for knowledge checks just to see where we are. But that gives me a pretty good idea. And somebody's completely confident. I am never completely confident, so I need to talk to that person. I'm always a little unsure if I can help people out. So this is a pretty confident group. That's good. The next poll we're going to do is a little bit different. So this is just an ABCDE poll. The next one we're going to do is a little different. It's an open-ended question. So you're going to come across and give me more than just one word. What components do you think are essential for developing digital literacy? So what do students really need to know to be considered digitally literate? Vocabulary. I don't know who said that, but that is a really good point. By the way, Poll Everywhere, if you have a paid version, you can actually have students sign into your class so you can see who said what, but I usually don't do that. I like them to feel like they can be anonymous. Their ability to read and comprehend what they're reading. It's a good one too. Interest. I had to take a minute. There's an N missing. Interest. Are they interested in it? Yeah. Sometimes you have to get them interested in it first. Somebody agrees about the vocabulary. They need terms related to digital stuff. Yes, there's a great project that World Ed did with a digital literacy vocabulary. Phone and mouse skills. vocabulary, keyboarding skills, passwords, more keyboarding skills, how to use an email account. Oh my goodness. Interest, communication, and creativity. Now you can see why this is interesting to ESL students, right? Because they're seeing the responses show up on the board, they're feeling validated, they're getting to practice their written English this way. It's anonymous. I did this one time with a very low beginning ESL class. The question was, what are 3 things in your kitchen? What are 3 things in your kitchen? Oh my goodness, the answers were hilarious. There were things in their kitchens that would never be in my kitchen. So you can do this kind of activity with the lowest ESL all the way up, this very open-ended kind of thing. Confidence, learner access, security stuff. Oh, security. Difference between how things work on phones and laptops and how they are similar. So that leads into that digital resilience piece. Very nice. Okay, so let's go on. Let's look at the official digital literacy definition. This has been used for several years. It comes from the American Library Association, and they say digital literacy is the ability to use ICT, information and communication technologies, to, and there's 4 components. So repeat after me. Find, evaluate, create, and communicate. Requiring both cognitive and technical. I know what I'm supposed to do and I'm able to implement it. Find, evaluate, create, and communicate information. I saw one recently that had it had a 5th one, and now I can't remember what that 5th one is. But these 4 will cover it. So we need them to know how to find information. Once they find information, they need to be able to evaluate that information. I always mention the octopus tree and the tree octopus activity. I think it's a BBC lesson plan. It's good for your intermediate students. And it's really an exercise in being able to identify the validity of a website, because there's a lot of bogus stuff out there. So that's a really fun one if you have intermediate level students. I adapted it from the BBC version, so it's kind of cool. But being able to determine if the information I received on the internet or digital media is valid, that's a big thing. How to create content that I want to share, and then how to communicate information in the digital world using proper netiquette, being appropriate in the digital world. I'm not teaching right now, but I was teaching at the graduate school for the College of Education at A&M. It was amazing to me that graduate students would send me texts that were like, send me the homework assignment. That was all it said. Well, one, you are talking to your professor, so let's backtrack a little bit about what is appropriate and inappropriate for talking to your professor. And also, it should just be an email. And this is something I'm having to deal with my coordinators. I have 15 coordinators for those 9 rural counties. And there seems to be some confusion about, when do you send an email? When do you send a Teams message, an instant message? And when do you send a text? And I've been collecting anecdotal data about this for a little while so I can talk with them, because it's kind of interesting based on personality, who thinks something is instant message worthy as opposed to an email. Part of it is because they know if they email me, I have a 3-day rule. If you email me, I assume it's not urgent and I will get back to it. So if you email me, I'm probably going to I usually get them the same day, but I could take up to 3 days to get back to you. If you instant message me, I'm probably going to get back to you at least in a couple of hours. If you text message me, I know there's an emergency and I'm probably going to respond immediately. If you call me, you'll probably get my voicemail, but because I'll be on a call or webinar or something. But that communication piece is something we need to make sure that we intentionally include in our ESL classes, because it is also culturally tied, right? It's not the same in every culture. So we want to make sure that we're including that as well. So in this activity, this is an activity that works best online, but you could do this in class. And I want to ask you afterwards how we can do that. Mark on this green arrow where you think, well, I'm not even going to put it on you, where you think adult education English language classes as a whole are in the continuum of including digital literacy in the ESL classroom on purpose. Okay, Michelle put hers up there, so you can just go to the annotate tools. So for those of you who are still working, so this is one of those activities that you can do even if you don't have access to a computer lab and you're still working on digital skills. If we were in my online class, for those who couldn't do it, I would ask them where they would want me to put it. But for this is just an example of taking it back to our analog classroom. So if I were doing this in a classroom, how would I do it? So this is one of those activities, if you're doing it online with an online class, it does take a little bit of practice because students have to get used to those annotate tools. If you're doing this in a classroom, typically what I would do is draw this on my dry erase board or chart paper and have students come up and make their marks. And then we would analyze it. So analytical thinking is part of digital skills. It's also part of math skills. So this is something you could do to get ready for all kinds of other activities, but specifically digital literacy activities in categorization, analysis, and data collection. I am going to clear all those drawings. So we're going to do one more poll everywhere. And this one is an example of the word cloud option for the polls. I want you to think of only one word. Okay, English teachers, not two words. How many words? One word. No compound words, no phrases, one word that describes the biggest challenge you face when including digital literacy in your classroom. What is the biggest challenge you face? So I'm going to activate that poll. Motivation, Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi, motivation, access, technology, money, 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 confidence, motivation. So again, this is an activity that ESL students really enjoy because they like to see as things are coming in. And again, there's other resources to do this. I'm just using the one that I use, which is Poll Everywhere, just because it's the one I'm comfortable with. That is a kind of a point as a teacher. If you're integrating digital literacy, you don't have to use all the tools that are out there. You would go crazy just finding them. You find the ones that work for you, that work well, and then you can add to your toolkit little by little, but you don't need to have to try to constantly be adding what is the newest, shiniest, brightest new thing that's come up. It'll drive you nuts because there's always something new coming out, right? So let's take a look at what it feels like. If you speak Ukrainian or Russian, this exercise is not for you, but for the rest of us, most of us, our phones are set into our native language. So when they come to our classes, typically their phones are in their native language, and we are going to have to teach them at some point how to add English to their phones if we're going to use their phones in class, and how to switch back and forth. But for right now, I want you to pretend like I have given you my Ukrainian phone and asked you to write the word student on your phone. So what letters are you going to need to write the word student? Take a second. You can write them down if you have a piece of paper, or just think about it if you don't. So what did you come up with? Let's see if you came up with the right letters. Before I do that, what do you observe about the Ukrainian? If you haven't looked at it too much, what can you observe about the Ukrainian alphabet as compares to the English alphabet? It's Cyrillic, yeah. But if you didn't know it was Cyrillic, what are some things that you would notice if you're coming from another language and you see this? If you're coming from English and this is what you see, you'd probably start making some connections in your head about which letters make which sounds, correct? All capital letters, okay, and some are similar. It's longer. There are more letters in their alphabet than in ours. That is true. So here is the word student. And I just want to point out a couple of things, because if our students are coming from a non-Roman alphabet, let's say they're coming from Arabic, or they're coming from a language that's close but no cigar, either way, when we start talking about digital literacy, that can cause problems on the keyboards. And even if you're coming, some of you said you use the Spanish keyboard, every now and then, for whatever reason, my computer decides to switch itself to Spanish. And then what happens is I'll be typing and things aren't in the right place, right? Because the keyboards aren't exactly the same. And so I'm not getting the results I want. So one of the things to keep in mind is that even the basics on their phones and keyboards is going to be a little tricky if they're coming from another language. So student here, the C is the S because there is no S. It's always C. C is never a K sound like in cat. That's always a K. So C or K, but student is C. T looks the same, yay. The Y is the oo sound, which just for fun, I should tell you also that this letter here is, oh, what happened? Use this. This letter here is the U sound. So Y is oo, and this is U. Isn't that weird? Michelle points out there's no capital letters in Arabic, so being told that a password must be case specific means nothing to them. And also, like, some of our capital letters and our lowercase letters don't really look like the same letter, R and R or G and G. Anyway, so this is the U, this is the D, and the E is pretty similar. The H is the N sound, and this is where we run into problems. And T is T. So student, there's student. But if this is an N, this is either a G or an H, depending. This is a V right here. This is L, this is P, and this is R. So as far as sounds go, and this is CH. And some of the others, they're just the ja and some sounds we don't even make. Just thinking for our English language learners, when we go into digital literacy and integrating digital literacy, the whole point of this is check your assumptions. Because what I found when I was writing the Digital Advancement and Resilience for Tyson, which became Texas, what we found was we had to really deconstruct what we assumed about keyboards, even starting with the alphabet and symbols, because it was not as simple as just asking them to write their name. So let's talk about some of the solutions to these problems that come up in our English language learner classes. One thing that I really want to stress is it's important to integrate digital skills and not overlay digital skills. So the example I like to use is I have a pencil. If somebody asks me to write my name, I'm going to pick up a pen or a pencil. I'm going to write my name. I'm not going to think about the pen or the pencil. The pen or the pencil is the technology. It is a technology. It's not high technology, but it's a technology. But I don't think about what technology I need to use. The pencil pretty much is invisible, right? We want the technology to, at some point, become more or less invisible to the student, and that they're using it for the purposes that they need for their lives, especially in adult education. When you try to teach it as a completely separate skills, it often causes anxiety. And students are coming to class for what? What do your English language students say that they want to do when they come to class? They want to speak, read, write, listen, understand English. They're not really there for digital literacy. And so if you pull it out like that, you may have some resistance from some students. I think some of you mentioned that early on. So let's think about a common ESL textbook. If you've ever seen, most of them are pretty much laid out the same. And there's certain units that are done by theme. So for example, the introductions unit, almost all of them, regardless of level, lesson one is introductions. So how could we naturally integrate digital literacy into the introductions unit? What are your ideas? Where would digital literacy fit naturally in your introductions unit, your first 2 weeks of class? Okay, if the students are allowing you to share their phone numbers using WhatsApp in class, learning to type their names is a good one, Michelle. Use of Remind in class. Email, typing lessons. Create an About Me slide on a shared Google slide. I like those. Now that's a little advanced, so it depends on where they come in. That would definitely be one. The one that I used to do for the beginners was they would interview one of their classmates and create a business card. Now, it was analog, but it was in preparation for taking that onto the computer later because we were working on some very basic stuff in the beginning. Digital polls, right? Even that poll everywhere, you could just ask them, what's your name, and have them respond back with that as the open-ended. What's your name? Where are you from? Some basics, computers, As long as it's integrated, Jose, because I'm trying not to freak them out the first week of class if they don't already have computer experience. So what about the food unit? If you're teaching ESL and you're in the food unit, the shopping for groceries and cooking unit, what are some natural things where digital literacy would come into play for that unit? Making it a shopping list for themselves. You said text the shopping list to themselves. I love that. But I actually taught my students how to say, hey, Google, make a shopping list. So they could actually speak it. They didn't even have to write it out. They could just say it, and then tell them their list of things that they were going to buy. Oh, she did one at DLTI this year. Okay. Looking up pictures on the internet. I was in, it was the jobs unit. It wasn't the food unit, but I was observing a teacher in the draw project, and she used Padlet, where she had students look up and post pictures of different jobs based on the hints that she gave at the top of the column. So that was really kind of fun. So you could do the same kind of same kind of activity with food. And they did that on their phones. They did not have a computer lab. So that was all phone activities. What about health? And also for shopping, you might want to think about comparison shopping and looking for discount codes, all kinds of things. Google Keep is good because you can share your info and list. Yeah. I also use it for travel, like Google Make a Packing List. What about the health unit? Where would digital literacy automatically come in for the health unit? In the meantime, Michelle says, I use food to teach Zoom skills. I ask everyone to turn their cameras off on Zoom in remote class. And then I say, turn on your camera if you like. Oh, I like this. It's like the stand up activity in your classroom, right, Michelle? Sit down, stand up.
Yes.
That's great. I love that idea. What a great idea. Then everyone turns their cameras on if they like it. All right. So what about health, guys? Where does digital literacy come in? I know you guys have been to a doctor at some point in your life. Where does digital literacy come in? Filling out forms. The last doctor I went to, you could not fill out paper forms. You had to fill them out online. When I went, there was an older lady who did not want to do it online. She wanted to do paper. Health form and prescriptions, research, GoodRx, or any of those types of prescription discount apps. Our students need to know those, especially if they don't have good insurance. How to set up your health portal information. And does anybody have the doctor's office where you go in and you have to sign in on a big tablet? I have helped so many, mainly English speakers, but they were older people to get signed in because they didn't know how to sign in. I've also seen it at the tax office here in Bastrop where you have to sign in on the computer before you can see anybody. So all of those are digital skills. I mean, guys, think about where we use digital skills. This is what you need to think about for your ESL class. Last time you got gas, what digital skills did you use at the gas station? The app for the gas discount, paying with a credit card versus using the chip or having to put it in. Do you want a receipt? Do you want a car wash? Do you want a drink? I just want gas. But yeah. And then if you use it as a credit card or a debit card, and do you need to put your zip code in or not? One of the things that I had to talk about with my class, because we had a problem here in Bastrop, was to avoid a certain gas station where you had to put your card in because the cards kept getting hacked. The taps are harder to hack. So, having those conversations, this is our real adult education world, things that they are really going through. But sometimes what happens is we're so used to just doing it, we don't think about people coming from another culture where that may not be the thing, right? They may not have to decide whether they're going to tap or insert or whether they're going to use debit or credit. And do they know their zip code to put it in if they use a credit card? Is it more expensive if I use a credit card rather paying cash? All those things. Parking lot question. Have you had students connect their smartphone via cable or mirror function to the TV monitor? I have, and I'm going to talk about a different way that I do that in just a minute. Thank you. It's a great question. So having students share their device so we can all see it. Yeah, I have done that. So basic solutions too. When we're talking about ESL, and some of you said you don't have computer labs, this is for you. We start on paper first. And the reason I started doing this is in my class, when I first started really digging into digital literacy intentionally, it was probably 2002 or so. I had a class that ran 4 days a week for 6 hours a day. Yes, that is the ideal ESL class. They learned English very quickly. But I only had the computer lab 1 hour, 1 day a week. And initially I would take them all to the lab. And I'm sorry if you can hear the dog bark. I hope I have this set up high enough you can't. I would spend so much time, I would waste so much time in the computer lab getting everybody situated and acclimated and knowing and running around. I put like 5 miles on my pedometer that day. It was ridiculous. And so then I started thinking, you know what, we need to do all of this on paper before we go to the lab. So I would take screenshots. We would fill everything out in the classroom. We would practice in the classroom. We would practice with the keyboard. So I'm going to turn my backdrop off because I want to show you something really quickly. Okay. But this little thing, this has helped me a lot. And Michelle specifically said I should show this to you. So I carry a little portable keyboard when I'm teaching, and it's upside down. How about like that? Okay. So I can pass this around to the students. And so instead of them sharing their device, they're using my device. The students are helping each other know what to say and how to say it. These aren't very expensive. So that was very helpful when I had limited access to computers. They were all using my computer that was projecting. They were helping each other. Everybody was practicing on the keyboard and with the mouse. And I had, a little mouse also that I would pass around. And that saved a lot of time once I got into the computer lab, so we could just jump in and do it. I would say that is probably one of the most important things. Think about wireless keyboards in general. The one I have is pretty small, so it's easy, it's portable, and they're like $5 at the Five and Below store. Okay, they probably have phones, but what do they know about their phones? Do they know how to turn the Bluetooth on and off? Do they know how to access internet Wi-Fi? Do they know when it's safe to access internet Wi-Fi? Do they know how to get security for the Wi-Fi in case it's not safe? I've had many people have their phones hacked, especially in public places like airports, whether it was an Android or an Apple. I mean, I know that Apple people think nothing can be hacked, but I've had friends who got their phones hacked, who had iPhones in the airports. So teaching them how to download an app. Do they know the password to the App Store? My experience for my students is their kids set up their iPhones for them and they have no idea what the passwords or their email is. And so then I have to go back and help them figure that out. So if I'm going to use an app, like I want them to use the Remind app or Poll Everywhere app instead of just the website version, then I need to make sure they know how to do that. And what else can we teach them about their phones that they probably don't know? Anything else you can think of? I said connecting to internet, Wi-Fi, airplane mode is one I teach because I tell them to put their phones on airplane mode during tests so that those Amber alerts don't come through. Anything else you can think of that we need to teach them about their phones that they probably don't know? One of the ones that they need to know is that it is not unlimited memory. So they can't just take a million pictures and never delete any of them. They have to decide to curate. There's a good English word for them to learn. Curate their photos and then possibly store them on a cloud option. How to scan a document. Yes. How to use the QR code scanner. Because if you go to a restaurant in Bastrop, likelihood is you will not have a menu. You will have a QR code on the table to scan. How to clean out your memory, how to check your battery, to see what's running in the background. So all of those device care things. And it's not just English language learners. A lot of people have phones that they really don't know how to do regular care for them. I go swimming every morning. And one day I was a little late, so the sun had come up. I have a waterproof pouch for my phone, so I have it next to the pool. And I went back to get out of the pool and I had my phone was overheating alert. I wasn't there long, but it's Texas. It's 105 degrees. The phone was sitting on concrete, making sure students know those things, that the phone is a machine. It cannot get too hot, just like a computer should not get too hot or too cold. It kind of shocked me. I then, since it was in the waterproof pouch, just threw it in the water and it cooled off really quick, but it did kind of shock me. Emails bounce back from storage that is full, right? And you know what? Some of them don't know how to set up their voicemail. Anybody try to call a student and it says, this person has a voicemail that has not been set up? Password management. So there's lots of things we can start with just their phones, and then we can move them to tablets and computers. So we're going to look at the DART, one of the lessons from the DART curriculum. And I'm going to pull up the TCAL website. This is classroom screen. So I put the TCAL here, but Michelle will put it in the chat for you. So here's our lovely TCAL, great resource for us, TCAL website. Right now, the DART curriculum is on the pop-up at the front, but when that eventually goes away, if you go under Institutes, Distance Learning and Technology Integration, the DART will be right here under Helpful Links. And one thing I love that TCAL did this, they didn't just put the 360 some odd page PDF up there for you. They broke it into a website where you can download one lesson at a time. When I wrote this, initially, it was written for people who had zero or little first language literacy or any experience with the Roman alphabet. So it's written with the alphabets first, and it's written to be integrated into an ESL class. It's not designed to be a standalone, although I've had some people do that. They've used it as a standalone ESL curriculum. I made it Creative Commons because Tyson paid me for the original and we just adapted it for Texas. So I didn't feel like I should be charging people for use, so it is free for you to use. And actually, if you go into any of these lessons, it's going to have the editable version also, so you can adapt it for whatever you want to do with it. We're going to look at lesson 2, but I just want to give you the overview before we go into it step by step. So you have your lesson overview, your objectives, what materials you'll need, including what handouts you will need. I used a lot of the ESL flashcards.com because they're free and you can get them in different sizes. So can you put that in the chat for me, Michelle, as a resource for them, ESLflashcards.com? Great free resource. I love it. It has instructional tips about additional keyboarding practice. It has standards. I have not tied it to the Texas standards, but it does tie to the SDEI, North Star, and CASAS content standards. It just has all kinds of really good flashcards you can use with different options. Okay, so going back to this, it gives you your vocabulary. We tell you what the key vocabulary is up front, because I know some teachers like to pre-teach the vocabulary. I like to teach it in context, but we wanted you to have that option. And then it's based on a 5E lesson plan: engage, explore, explain, elaborate, and evaluate. So all of them are set up the same way. And we're going to look at that in just a second. And then there's some differentiation information. So every lesson on here is set up like that. And if you notice, we have lowercase alphabet introduction, and then we have lowercase on the keyboard. And what happens with the on the keyboard is they end up practicing with a printout picture of a keyboard. Uppercase on the keyboard. Numbers and special keys, symbols. Introduction to security, talk about strong and weak passwords, talk about parts of the computer, and then in lesson 10, they finally sign in. So this isn't designed to like get somebody on the computer right away. It's designed to hopefully integrate with what you're doing already in your beginning ESL classes, although you can adapt it for higher levels. That's what Denise Guckert did, her part of the project. And it was designed because the teachers were complaining that they weren't integrating technology because it took too much time. And it shouldn't take too much time. It should be a natural occurrence, just like it is when you go to the gas station and you have to use your debit card. So just trying to include that as part of the class. So here's the example from lesson 2, which is when they're going to take those lowercase alphabet and they're going to put them into the keyboard. We review the alphabet using those ABC flashcards. How do you spell your name? Write the letters on the board. Then have them talk about texting. Do you send texts to friends and family? And one of the things I wanted to know is if they speak their texts and listen to them, or if they write them. It's a kind of a gauge of their first language literacy. And then we practice on a keyboard. So we have this picture of a keyboard that the students get. And the example is, the I do is, I'm going to spell my name, touch each letter as I say it. So I would say Glenda, and I would have them touch the letters, and I would be checking to see if they were touching the right letters. And then I would just start pulling flashcards out and seeing if they could find those letters. Then they would do it with a partner, the same thing. They would use the flashcards and they would shuffle the deck and try to see if they could find those cards on the keyboard. And then for the evaluate, I'm going to give some basic words and see if they can color in the letters that they need for those words. So thinking about what we just did as far as the alphabet, spelling your name, finding letters from the keyboard, calling out some basic words that they need to know. If you notice, these words are all pretty common. The only one that's exception is user. And that one needs to be there because it's a common word for digital literacy. So looking at that lesson 2, what is my language objective? What did I write that in mind? What did I have in mind as the student will be able to when I wrote that? Right. So Carly, there's 2 parts of that, right? They need to be able to identify the letters, including the sounds that those letters make, and they need to be able to find them on a keyboard. Exactly. So there's 2 parts. The first, the language objective, is being able to identify those letters and the sounds they make. And then my digital objective is being able to locate them on the keyboard. So it's 2 distinct objectives there for me as a teacher. The idea when I was writing all of those lessons is, how is this going to support what I'm doing in the classroom without just adding something to the classroom activity? Is it going to support what the students are there to do, which is learn English, and hoping to make it as invisible as the pencil, basically. Is there anything else that we could do to better integrate those two objectives, the alphabet and the keyboard, that you can think of? Other activities we could have used? And while you're typing, I'm just going to say, when I wrote this, also in the back of my mind the whole time was, these are examples of things you can do. And my hope was that teachers would take it, look at some of the ideas, and then that would help them generate other ideas for how to integrate digital literacy into their existing lesson plans without just overlaying another something else we have to check off on our box type. We already have all these other things that we're supposed to be doing in our ESL class. I didn't want it to feel like here's something else we have to do. All right, let's take a little break before we get into digital resilience. Before we do, this is the randomizer on Classroom Screen 2. I'm going to put this into the chat too, because it's a great resource, whether you're doing in-person or online classes. And I can click through this and I could say, oh, look, it came up with Michelle. That's good, because Michelle's not shy. Michelle, what is something you heard today that was something you could apply and maybe new or a reminder?
I think the reminder about really scaffolding the skills, like thinking through what do they need to be able to do first in order to be able to do something later, like the Google slide, making a Google slide. There's several steps ahead of that I need to scaffold to get them there.
I'll do one more person. Let's see who else comes up. Carly, what is one thing you picked up today so far?
I really like the keyboard thing with the letters and the names. I think it was really more interactive, especially for those beginning ESL students, would really help them, and it'd be more engaging, more fun.
So this, I just wanted to demonstrate this randomizer. I love this in my class because occasionally I started using the randomizer in class because I had one student that would dominate, try to answer every question, not let anybody else talk. So I started using the randomizer in my face-to-face class just so I could make sure that everybody got an opportunity to say something without having somebody. You could do the same thing with pencils, right? Or popsicle sticks, or I've seen people do them with just pulling things out. But the students really liked this. And it was really funny because they would be like, oh, please don't call me. Please don't call me. But then they would get all excited when their name showed up. So I just wanted to share that with you. So I'm going to set the timer. We'll take a 5-minute break, stretch, get some water, go to the restroom, and I'll see you in 5. All right. So let's get this show on the road so we can tie it up. I was thinking on the break, I showed you the portable keyboard. The one thing I neglected to mention is the document camera. So document cameras, of course, used to be extremely bulky, big, and expensive. They are not anymore. You can get one as cheap as $60. This one that I have on the screen here, this is the one that I've used with my students and my teachers. It's about $90. This one plugs in to any device, any USB device, and very portable. I use it to show my students what I'm doing on my keyboard, or to show where that letter is. And sometimes when I'm trying to show, like, I need you to hit Control-Alt-Delete, I need to show them on the keyboard what I need to have them do. I can't just say it, because what they'll do is they'll do it in order instead of trying to press them, or they'll try to press them all at the exact same time, which doesn't work well. So if you can invest or get your program to invest in these little document cameras, they are a lifesaver for digital literacy for ESL. All right, let's talk a little bit about digital resilience now. So digital resilience is a hot topic right now, and the pace at which technology has changed is escalating. So does anybody recognize this particular computer? So this is a Radio Shack TRS 80. I got one of these, I think it was 78, might have been 77 or 78. When my neighbor next door got one of the first Apple computers that came out. And it only had the keyboard part of it. We didn't have a monitor for it. We hooked it up to the TV. When you wanted to save something, it had a cassette tape player that you bought, metal cassette, not the nylon ones that you usually see, but metal cassettes. And when it would save, it would squeal because it was carving into those metal discs. And if you wanted to do anything with it, you had to program it. You didn't just go out to the store and buy a program. You had to actually borrow programming from somebody or create your own code. So this was, when I was a kid, this is what I started with. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm comfortable with computers, is because in order to play Possum Run, which was like Frogger, for those of you who remember what Frogger is, I spent like 3 days writing code into it. And then I had to figure out where I made all my typos as a kid and before I could ever play it. And then my sister had one that was Star Wars that was even worse when that one came out. So that's what we did. So this was one of the early home computers that you could get. And then does anybody recognize this one? So when I was in junior high, these came right around junior high, these came out. And these were it's an IBM computer, and you had to put a floppy disk in it to boot the operating system before you could start. So it wasn't like the operating system was in the computer. You had to boot it up on that disk before you could start. And then everything got saved to those 5 1/4 disks. Yeah, it could have been an Apple too. I was an IBM person, but it could have been the same thing. But I left those 5 1/4 disks in my car one time. It was pretty bad. They melted. I lost all my work. So I moved from the TRS-80 to this floppy disk, and I thought I was in seventh heaven because, you could actually buy disks, floppy disks that already had all the programming on it. So you didn't have to write your own programs, which was great. And then we went to this. This was the one that, remember I said I took to my class? This is the one that I took to my class. It was a IBM ThinkPad. It was probably about 3 inches thick and probably weighed 10 to 15 pounds. That was one of the first laptops I had. That little red button was the mouse, and it frequently fell off. The little red tip fell off. It was really bad. But this was before the ones with the little mouse pad that you could use your finger with came out. And then after that, I kind of skipped because we did have some other computers in the middle of those. But then I went to the phone because the next big change for me was going to a phone. So once I went to the IBM ThinkPad, the other computers were all pretty much similar. But then the phone became a whole new experience for me. I had to learn a whole bunch of new things. I resisted the smartphone for a little bit, but not very long. And actually, I think my first one was a BlackBerry. Remember the BlackBerry with the pull-out keyboard? I thought that was so cool and had no idea what was coming. And then finally, now we have these tablets. And honestly, my phone, I have one of the Z Flip phones from Android. It does more than that TRS-80 could ever have imagined. It just did so much more. And it's only been a very short drop in the bucket in history that these changes have come through, and they're continuing to make changes. Computers are getting smaller and smaller. My watch now can do almost everything my phone can do, which is kind of scary, including send text messages and Google search. So what is digital resilience is being able to make these shifts and not get left behind. And it's a really key skill. So the definition that we're going to work with, remember that the definition for literacy was find, evaluate, create, and communicate. So the digital resilience is the awareness, skills, agility, and competence. Awareness, skills, agility, and competence. Those are the 4 key pieces. Awareness, skills, agility, and competence to be empowered users of new technologies and adapt to changing digital skill demands. And you guys mentioned that in your definitions earlier. So you're on the right page here. Things are going to change. Anybody who has ever had an update, including Windows, every time you get used to some Windows interface, they change it. Okay, I got used to Windows 98. Here comes Windows Vista. Well, that wasn't very good. So let's go to the new Windows XP. And now we're going to go to Windows 10. Okay, Windows 10, we're not going to do any more changes. Okay, here you go, Windows 11. And so every time you get used to one, they come out with another one. And in order for us to be successful in the digital world, we have to have resilience and be able to change. Another example is, I've heard this from staff. I know how to use Excel, but I don't know how to use Google Sheets. So what are they telling me as far as their digital resilience? If you tell me I can use Excel, but I can't use Google Sheets. So your confidence, I think, is the problem. Your agility, it's a will. Somebody said you have to be willing to try. It's also a will issue because you haven't even really tried both to see that they're so similar that there's very little that would cause you any problems as far as normal everyday use. There's some things that Excel can do that Sheets can't if you get very advanced. But for what most people use Sheets for, there's no jump there. It's being aware of how they're similar and how they're different, having the skills to use a spreadsheet, having the agility to change if the ribbons are not exactly the same, and the confidence that you're going to be able to do what you need to do. So that is the digital resilience. Including digital resilience in our classes can be challenging. One of the things when we're thinking about digital resilience is to look at the basic skills that people need and how those might look different in different platforms or on different technologies. One of the things that we use to do that is the Seattle Digital Equity Initiative. This was some research that was done, obviously in Seattle, where they talked to students, they talked to business owners, they talked to educators, and they came up with this list of 10 categories of things that they thought that to be successful in the digital world, people need to be able to do or know. So I'm going to pull that up real quick. Yeah, I can make that bigger for you guys so you can see a little bit better. Okay, so for the communication part of those skills, being aware and adapt to behavioral norms, that's a big thing. Being able to collaborate, I use that a lot in my class. We use a lot of collaboration tools like Google Docs, Google Sheets. Make voice and video calls. Most of my students don't need a whole lot of help, but they may need to consider some of the etiquette around that, like not doing it in a bank. Don't want to go there. Post messages on social media, and it comes under a different online life, but I had a student recently who got into a minor fender bender, and her English is very poor, but she can fool somebody into thinking that she speaks English. She really didn't know the protocol as to what happens for a fender bender. They didn't call the police. And for some reason, she told the other driver she didn't have a driver's license, which she did have a driver's license. So he took a picture of her in her hijab and posted it on Facebook and next door saying, this person just hit me. And she doesn't have a driver's license or insurance. So even though she was wrong and that she didn't know the protocols around it, we need to make sure our students, I've never taught that. I'm just going to be honest. I've never taught what to do in a car accident, especially a fender bender. I will from now on. But protecting herself online, she had the right to report that post because it was inflammatory. It could have been considered hate speech the way it was written. So she could get that taken down. So social media, understanding how those social media work and what your rights are in those, your privacy settings, what you're sharing. For creation, there's all kinds of activities here for creation. But that computational thinking that I was talking about, that's something we can do in every classroom, whether you have computers available or not. There's a lot about thinking about if-then loops. If this happens, then what happens? Sometimes call it consequences. Action and consequences is what I'll use in my ESL class. And just thinking about what happens if I do this, then this happens. That's computational thinking. Creating new content, designing content, which you can do on paper first. Multimedia production. I still have some of these videos that I would have students do cooking videos in my ESL class. Those were so much fun. Or digital literacy, not digital literacy. I would have them do PowerPoint and record it as with audio, and that would be their videos. I don't think I ever had my students build a website, but these are just some things that they came up. Here's that device ownership. So device basics, how do you purchase it? How do you dispose of it? How do you make sure it's reset to factory default before you dispose of it so somebody doesn't have access to all your information? Finding tech support, who do you ask for help? And how to protect your devices, troubleshooting. The gateway skills are how to use those accessibility features if they need them, how to do basic internet search. So you can see these are pretty simple. Basic mouse, make sure it's touching the table. My biggest thing with my students when I'm teaching them to use the mouse is they want to hold it up above the table. How to download a document and know where you download it to. Has anybody besides me ever downloaded a document and not been able to find where you downloaded it to? You know you just downloaded it, especially if you downloaded it to your phone. I can find it on the computer because I can check in my little things downloaded list and find out where it went. But sometimes when I download a document to my phone, I'm like, where did it download it to? So I have to figure that out. Understanding what the internet and the web are. There's some really funny videos about that. Using your email, how to send email, how to choose between reply and reply all. Anybody reply all when you meant to reply and got embarrassed? I know I have, where I accidentally replied all. And then the basics of passwords and connecting to Wi-Fi. There's information skills. These are things that you can do without a computer lab, awareness of info tools, evaluating, comparing information to see if it's valid, identifying knowledge gaps. These are all things that you can do in a classroom and not even have a computer in the room. Lifelong learner, how to get a hold of educational resources on the internet. That is something our students need to know how to do. One thing I love about Quizlet, when I try an app and a student says, hey, can we do this at home? I get really excited. Yes, you can. And then reflection, mobile ownership, how to buy them, how to choose between Wi-Fi and cellular data and when to use which, how to, if you're going to use your banking app, for example, how to make sure that that's secure, your basic functions, your layout, privacy. So they got all of these, and then online life. And then there's a couple others here. This is the important one for me, privacy and security. Just being aware. Remember, it's awareness is one of the key parts of that definition. Being aware of what you're sharing and who you're sharing it with. I share my location always with my roommate that we've been roommates since 97. So if anything happens to me, she'll know where I am. I also have a fall alert on my watch. So if I fall, like I did during the ice storm last year, she'll get an alert saying, hey, she fell. You might want to check on her. My mom is terrified of that. She thinks that they're going to hunt me down from the net in the sky. And I'm like, well, me personally, I want somebody to know where I am. I watch way too much crime TV for them to not know where I am. Safety for kids. This was always a big thing for me. One of the main reasons I was very serious about including digital literacy intentionally, systematically, and slowly in my ESL class was because all of my students had kids. And the kids were on the computers and the parents didn't know what the kids were doing. And then that means they can't keep their kids safe. And so that was a big deal to me. It was also a big deal for me that they could access the PD portal, the parent portal for the school district. And then a lot about phishing, spear phishing, which is what I get now, and spam in general, and how to identify and not be fraud. I love reading the AARP magazine. They usually have at least one article on the latest fraud that's being used and how to avoid it. And then there's workplace, the stuff that we do at work. So finding a job, applying for a job, following workplace rules and procedures, knowing how to get to your HR department, how to find your pay stub, because a lot of companies don't mail them anymore. You go online or you don't get it. Creating presentations, creating documents, spreadsheets, and then managing professional networks. So just because we have English language learners doesn't mean that they can't become a member of TALE, for example, or other professional networks, so that when they go to look for a job that they can show, but they have to know how to do that. So I love this list. I was telling Michelle earlier that what I like to do before I have you do that activity, at the beginning of my classes, I had, this one's pretty outdated. I need to update it because they're asking us to do a survey for this year. But at the beginning of the year, I would always ask my students these questions. Do you have a computer or tablet at home? Who uses it? How often do you use the computer? What do you use it for? Do you have internet access at home? Do you use it outside of the home? Where do you use it? Like, do you use it at the library or a friend's house? Do you use the internet on your phone? And then just a list of things that I wanted to know if they could do. I'm comfortable sending and receiving an email, for example. And I had a couple of specific things, like I wanted to know if they knew what an RTF and a PDF was, because we were going to talk about it. And now I want to add, like, do you know what a GIF or a JPEG or a PNG are? And the risks associated with all those, MP3, MP4. I'm just curious if they realize which ones of those file types may have significant risks associated with them. The interesting thing to me was I would always do this at the beginning of the year, and I would have like 2 people who owned a computer in a class of 30. But over the course of the year, as we systematically included digital skills into their lessons, by the end of the year, about half the class would have a computer. So it wasn't that really that, they are low income, generally speaking, but it wasn't necessarily that they didn't have the money to invest in a computer. They didn't see the value in investing in one. And they had kids at home, like I said. So in my mind, they needed to have a computer at home so their kids didn't get behind in school. So that's something I'm going to be updating, and I'll probably be using this semester with my program. I do have it in Spanish as well, because the most common first language in my program is Spanish. So this was the Spanish version there. So here's what I want you to do. I want us to go to the Jamboard. You can either use the QR code if you want to do it on your phone, but if you want to do it on a web page, which is probably easier, you can go to the bit.ly link. The bit.ly links are case sensitive. So here it is. And there's 4 slides up here. It's communicate, create, cybersecurity, and gateway skills. What I would like you to do is think about your classes, pick up a sticky note, and write one activity or place where you think digital literacy would naturally integrate into your class, an activity that you could do to support the ability to communicate, and be thinking in terms of resilience too. So we have these ed tech routines, like the poll everywhere is an ed tech routine, something that I do periodically in my class. And then I do it again, and I may do it slightly differently, but it's basically the same routine. So if I'm doing a document, for example, and I'm working on resilience, I could sometimes do paper and then do Word, or WordPad and then do Word and then do Google Docs. So I could build digital resilience. They could see the similarities across that spectrum of tools. So go ahead and take a few minutes and just put your sticky notes on here. Keep in mind when you write sticky notes that you can move them around and you can make them bigger if they're hard to see. And to get to the other slides, you can use this arrow up here, or you can click on the slides and just go to the one you want to put an idea on. So I'd like for everybody to come up with at least one classroom activity for at least one of those categories. Ooh, pen mouse using email. It's one of my favorites. So you want to use the sticky notes. You can use the drawing, but I find drawing with a mouse really hard. Jamboard is another one of those ed tech routines I use quite a bit in my classes, because once students get used to it, it's just very easy for us to, okay, I did a Jamboard. Everybody put your sticky notes up there, and they already know what it is because it's a routine. So I'm only seeing people on the communicate board. So I'm sure you've got some ideas. No, I see a couple of people on Gateway. Somebody jumped into cybersecurity. I'm surprised more people aren't on cybersecurity, because that's a hot topic, in my opinion, for ESL students. Man, they get some bad scams. I don't know about you guys, but during the heart of the pandemic, I was having to talk students out of WhatsApp. I'd have to delete their posts because they would be posting like, Walmart's giving away $1,000 in free groceries. I'm like, no, they're not. They really aren't. So let's get rid of that post. And can you repost that spreadsheet, Michelle? If you guys don't remember what those are, if you look on the spreadsheet, it'll remind you what that checklist has on it. See, that one about the children's portal, I always tried to get to the point where I could have somebody from the school district come and demonstrate that portal to my students. That was an important thing to me. I think it is unjust that if the parents don't have good digital skills, the school doesn't communicate with them when they miss assignments and they're skipping class until it's really too late. And they can do that on the portal, on the parent portal, really easily. Yeah, it's funny. Email a teacher with assignments. So my emails would start off for my beginning class. The first email would be, hi, my name is Dr. Rose. What's your name? And then best Glenda, or whatever I would decide to say. And then they would have to respond. And then the next time we would just have that back and forth on the emails until we got to the point where they had to add attachments, which was fun. So yeah, getting to the point with attachments was always a struggle. Try to create new math problems on their own. Are you teaching Spanish GED, or is this for ESL or for HSE? I did teach math in my ESL classes, specifically word problems, because my favorite thing is when they would come back, teacher, we did this exact word problem yesterday with my son or whatever, and it would be great. Hey, you can read the word problem. In my Microsoft Word for ESL students, one of the activities was women in history. They had to find a person in American history, specifically a woman who made a major contribution, and write a little very short biography about them. Slideshow from where they are from. I have one, I don't know if I can pull it up fast enough, that we did. Yeah, so this is the one that they had. I gave them like sentence stems, and they would have to write their little, well, she was more intermediate because she went off. But we got to the point where they could write these little reports like this. The fun part was, the first part of that activity was actually searching for and finding a picture of their hometown. It was over several lessons that we did that one, and saving the photo to a place where they could use it later. So here's a beginner. I am from Mexico. My city is Canadas. The weather is temperate. It's very nice. It's very nice, the nature. Because their questions for this were like, where are you from? What's the weather like? What are the people like? Basically like that. The questions we were using for the same questions we were using for the unit. You can see I had a Christmas activity too that we did. We had winter holidays. People wrote up about their winter holiday traditions. So these are actually things that students have done for me when we got into the technology. And I kept some of their emails just to have for later. How to set up parental controls. Yay. Yeah. How to secure passwords. One of the things about passwords that I really strongly suggest talking about in the lesson that you're talking about how to create strong passwords using phrases and substitutions, that kind of thing, I strongly encourage my students to create some sort of formula. So it could be a year that has significance to them. So let's use 81. I don't know what 81 was. And then maybe their initials, and then choose a symbol like @ or exclamation point, and then something that refers to the website that they're using the password for. But if they use the same formula every time, even if they can't remember the password, they'll remember the formula, and it's more likely that they'll remember it. I used to really early on, of course, I would copy all their passwords down, but that's a security risk in itself, right? Having everybody's passwords. So we started using the formula version, and that worked really, really well. So I always suggest coming up with some sort of algorithm that helps you create distinct passwords, but be able to remember them. Typing. Now, there's lots of typing practices up there. Typing.com is one that you can use for free and have a teacher if you want to do some specifically typing practice. Using the paper keyboards first is very helpful. Even teaching them like the Bluetooth keyboard that I have. I'm going to be honest, at this point in my life, when I travel, I very rarely take my laptop. I take my phone because my phone can access almost everything I have, including Office 360 on the web and Google. And so I can do everything. But I take my little Bluetooth keyboard because I'm not typing on my phone. I'm just not. It's just too hard. And I can connect my phone usually to the TV in the hotel, right? So, right, there you go. Michelle says she does the same thing. Unless I absolutely know that I'm going to need my computer, I don't do it. But these little Bluetooth keyboards, they're small, they go with you. But you can also use these with students to teach them typing skills on their phones if you don't have devices for everybody. And that's a good place to start. So passing around a keyboard to start off with, but if you can get students to invest, or if your program can invest in some small ones that they can connect to their phone so they can practice, especially if they're planning on going to GED, because at some point, if they're going to GED or Spanish GED, they are going to have to type on a keyboard. So they need to practice. How to find documents. Yeah. I even talk to them a lot about organizing their files. So like you guys saw my Dropbox file. I've been teaching a long time, since 1987. So I've got a lot of files. So when I'm looking for something, especially if it's in my Dropbox, teaching them about folders, this is computational thinking, right? How do I want to set up my folders? And then how do I want to set, so this is all my curricula. There's a textbook, there's grammar. Under grammar, I also have textbooks. And teaching them so that they can find what they're looking for. And if they're going to have to search, teaching them how to do advanced searches so they can find what they're looking for. The GED test too, is they are hunting and pecking, they're going to lose time. And the Microsoft certification, which I do for ESL, I won't let them take that test until they can type at least 22 words per minute. Because what I found is if they're any slower than that, there is no way they're going to finish the certification test in an hour. So that's where typing.com came into play for me, because for the certification test for ESL, I needed to make sure they could type fast enough to pass. Parental controls and what to do if an account is hacked. We talked about that. And then, okay, gateway skills, typing, keyboarding, hardware, software. Now, my favorite thing to do with hardware and software, specifically hardware, I will take a old desktop computer and basically take the cover off and look at it. And what I try to talk to students about is, how many of you drive a car? How many of you know how a combustion engine works? I don't have to know how a combustion engine works to be able to drive my car. What I need to know is if I put my foot on the gas, it's going to go forward if the car's in drive. And if I put my foot on the brake, it's going to stop. And that I don't want to hit the gas and the brake at the same time unless I want to squeal my wheels. So the computer is the same concept. I don't have to know how the motherboard works. I got so frustrated when I was first trying to do this because I was looking at books and they all started with that. They all started with the motherboard. And I'm like, I don't need them to know how the motherboard works. I just don't. Or chips or, binary code. I don't need them to know that. I need them to know what to do with the computer. I know we're about out of time, so let me finish up here. Draw, we talked about a little bit. There are resources on Links. If you go to Links, which is our national professional development organization, they have a whole resource here. And Michelle said that they'll probably be putting that into the PD portal as well. They have 4 modules that are self-paced, but they have a lot of ideas and tools, activities that you can do, ed tech routines that you can do. They have workbooks. So this is something, if you want to go deeper, that you can look into. The Digital Skills Library from EdTech World Ed has a lot of resources that you can use. It's got its own URL now. That's why. Digital Skills Library.org. Okay. This is broken up by the Seattle Digital Equity Initiative categories, and you can go in here and find different activities under each one of those. But the main thing I wanted to show you is up here. See that digital skills glossary? This is one of my favorite things ever. You can go in here, you can look at it different ways, and it will give you definition, how to use it in a sentence. You can listen to it. It is all the words that we basically, a lot of the words that we use in technology, and you can look them by themes. You can just look them up. There's an instructor guide, but I really encourage you to explore the glossary. It's really cool. Teachers created this, by the way. They came up with a template, but the teachers came up with the definitions and everything. And then there's the EdTech Integration Strategy Toolkit, which ties back to the Digital Skills Library. So you can look at that later. All right, so we're at the end of our time. Yeah, okay. So there's 4 components. What were the 4 components for digital literacy? Find. So after we find something in the digital world, what do we have to do with it? All right, repeat after me, just to make sure everybody has it. Find, create, communicate. Find, evaluate, create, communicate. Start with paper. Find out what your students know, build from there, go slow, use one tool at a time, integrate it, don't just overlay it, manage emotions, keep the stress level low. And then digital resilience, what are the key components of digital resilience? So we need awareness, skills, adaptability, and confidence to be empowered users of new technologies. So flexibility, so we got to think about 2 things. We got to think about digital literacy. Can they find, evaluate, create, and communicate? And we think about digital resilience. Do they feel like empowered users of new technologies? Can they make shifts from one type of technology to the other? Okay, got some ideas. At least look at the DART curriculum. You can get a lot of ideas there, or the Tech Integration Library.
If you use any of these ideas in your classes coming up, email us and let us know. We love to hear about how you're utilizing these ideas to build digital skills in your classes.
If you just want to brainstorm ideas too, reach out to me. I'd love brainstorming. What can we do to make this work? I'm teaching this. How does digital literacy fit?
We hope you enjoyed this pre-recorded webinar. After you have passed the final test with a score of 80% or greater and have received your certificate of completion, please take a few moments to complete the course evaluation. Participant feedback helps Train PD at TCAL continue to provide high-quality professional development. To leave a course feedback, please go to the completed portion of your transcript. To do this, hover over the My Learning tab and select View Your Transcript. Click on the drop-down arrow next to the word Active and select Completed. Then, click Evaluate in the drop-down menu next to the course you just completed. Please note that your feedback is greatly appreciated.